Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Good evening. Welcome to Super Secret Sunday System Streams. I'm your host, Derek Melinda, welcoming you back to another stream. And this one, hey, we have two adventurers. We have Kyle, welcoming Kyle to the adventure. Welcome, Kyle, new member, and Super Princess with a 2-month resub. So thank you so much, Super Princess. Thank you, Kyle, for joining the adventure. Enjoy those emojis and enjoy the loyalty badge. Appreciate your support, and that means a lot to us. Thank you so much. So, for those of you who are unaware, I sometimes stream on Sundays, usually to talk about systems. Sometimes it's a first look at a brand new system that I've never looked at before, and we're kind of going through the process together. Sometimes it's more of a deep dive into a system that I am familiar with, and I'm just sharing my experiences, my love, my frustrations with that system with you all. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Torchbearer. And this game, I love it. I hate it. As I'm sure I think you will too. Because it is a game that has had a incredibly humongous, outsized influence, I'll say that, on the way that I view role-playing games, the way that Aaron Smith from this channel views role-playing games. And hopefully, as we go through it tonight, you'll definitely see the influence, especially on Aaron's game design processes or thoughts. And the reason why I say I love it and I hate it, or I should say it has an outsized influence, is because for the number of times that we've actually gotten this to the table, it has a considerably large influence on the way that we, think about games. Ayo, our boy GM Scott in the house.
GM Scott tipped $25. Thanks for the TB stream, Derek. This is probably one of my #1 systems to try and steam from. I just haven't done it yet.
Absolutely. And of course there's a good Torchbearer story as well with GM Scott, because what I'm holding up here is actually the first edition of Torchbearer, and mine has it's been around. It's been in the back of many a con bags. I used to take this to a lot of Gen Cons as well and play it. But there's a second edition of Torchbearer that is out, and it was a Kickstarter. I did not kickstart it. I think I was hiking the Appalachian Trail or something. I don't know. I missed the Kickstarter. Long story short, I wanted the Kickstarter, so I went on eBay to try to buy someone's Kickstarter, and I got massively outbid. And it turns out I was massively outbid by people from my own Patreon, who ended up forcing me to have to pay way too much. Now, GM Scott is asking the real important question. Here is my still sealed Torchbearer 2nd Edition Kickstarter box, which I bought off of eBay after paying too much, having to outbid my people. Now, why is this still in the box? Because I'm not ready for it. I'm not ready for it emotionally. I'm not ready for it emotionally. Now let's see what we got for the poll here. All right. Well, 66% of you say that you're aware of it, and that's about it. 20% own it, but have never played it. 13% have never even heard of it, and 0% have ever played it or ran it. So we are in the winner's circle tonight. Ayla's got it exactly right. Alia says 15 viewers at the start, you'll get that platinum play button in no time. What is up, Lolly? Hello. Chris, what is going on, my friend? So, yeah, we are going to talk about Torchbearer. And to talk about Torchbearer is sort of the beginning of a long journey into the minds of Luke Crane. And many people here in the channel and in our Discord know of the game Burning Wheel. And Burning Wheel, of course, is a very, very famous game in the indie game designer space, made by Luke Crane. It is a fantastically complex game. I wouldn't say it's complicated, but I would say it's very complex. It has a lot of moving pieces, and Crane believes that it's almost like a watch, right? Not a digital watch, but a traditional watch with springs and gears, right? A precision instrument, fantastically complex. And you don't open up your watch and start messing around with gears, and you don't start messing around with springs, because unless you have no idea what you're doing. And it's so fantastically complex and small and fragile, like you don't know what you're going to break. But if you leave the damn thing alone, just using springs and gears and sprockets, your watch can tell you the time and track the day and track the date and track the phases of the moon, right? Just like this fantastic amount of tech sandwiched into this very small piece of game. And that to me is what Burning Wheel is. It's like a very, very bespoke antique or very high-end Rolex or Omega watch. Well, so that though brings us to Torchbearer. Now, Torchbearer is Burning Wheel inspired. It is derived from Burning Wheel. So there's game elements and there are game considerations that are influenced by Burning Wheel, and also from another Burning Wheel inspired game, which came before Torchbearer, called Mouseguard. So on the spectrum of things, I would say that like Mouseguard is probably the simplest, and then a step up is Torchbearer, and then several steps up is Burning Wheel. So tonight, we're going to talk about Torchbearer, and we are going to I'm going to try to explain the basic concepts for it, and more importantly, answer your questions. And I want you to understand why I think this game is so compelling. I want you to understand, like, what are the parts of it? What are the pieces of it that I find really, really compelling? And maybe what are some of the parts and pieces of it that are, have always grated me and don't quite stick with me. And maybe they'll stick with you. Just in case we're ready to go, I do have my whiteboard tablet ready to go. So, Torchbearer. So to understand Torchbearer, you have to understand that technically it has two authors, Luke Crane and Thor Olavsrud, who is a Nordic, Scandinavian, one of those two. And there's some definite kind of, like, if you've read Free League or Vossen, that kind of stuff, there's definitely some Nordic influences, especially in some of the campaign stuff for Torchbearer. But the core premise of the game is it is a love letter to BX D&D, right? I'm talking about the magenta box, it's over there. Right? This game. And if you're not familiar with this game, you probably are, because it's basically the version of the game that, like, seemingly every indie OSR Kickstarter hacks, right? This is Labyrinth Lord. This is Old School Essentials. This is, 25 other Kickstarters. And Moldve Basic, or Moldve Cook Basic, as it's sometimes called, was very, very, very instrumental to a lot of people in defining what Dungeons and Dragons is. And so this is their love letter to that game, done through the guise of Burning Wheel. And so what that means is we are going to have mechanical components interacting with narrative components, right? Which we sometimes call mechano-narrative systems, but they're doing it under the aspects of emulating a Dungeon Dragons, going into the depths of the earth for loot and plunder and treasure and, that kind of thing. So it's taking, like, the concepts of Burning Wheel and distilling them down into this kind of Dungeons and Dragons game. So, before we get into that, I thought we should take a look at the character sheet, because this will help us understand a little bit more about how the game operates and works. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. It's a lot of bit. Okay, here we go. So your character, like most D&D characters, right? Your character has a name. Your character has stock, okay. So we get to the first thing. Luke Crane loves to use his own words for things. I don't know if it makes him feel special, or if he just likes to be unique, or, maybe he didn't want to use race. Stock means race, but you'll see this time and time again where there's sort of this nomenclature that comes up in these Burning Wheel and Torchbearer games that makes it feel distinctly tied into these games. I'll bring up some more points as we get to it, as we get further on. So your character has a class, just like D&D. Your character has some background information, age, where they're from, who are their parents, who's their mentor, who's their friend, who's their enemy, what level are they, what's their alignment, okay? But then right away, we see some things here that are not traditional D&D mechanics, okay? We see belief, goal, and instinct. And belief is a blank space where you are going to write something that your character believes. And as you can see here, it says here on the screen, playing a belief earns a fate point. Now, you may be like, oh, I know meta currencies. Well, guess what? Burning Wheel games have several meta currencies, and Torchbearer is no different. Okay. You have fate points and you have persona points. Okay. So these are two separate meta currencies. You earn them and they do different things. All right. And so it's just one of the quirks of the system. It's basically two different ways of sort of improving or otherwise being rewarded or leveraging your character's goals. So anyways, if we take a look at what a fate point is, you can see that we not only have to track how many we currently have banked, but how many we have spent total. So this tells us that there's something about the game that cares about how many fate points we have spent. And it ties into your character's progression. So spending fate points is a good thing to do because that's going to allow our character to progress. But that means in order to spend a fate point, we have to have a fate point. And in order to gain a fate point, we have to play to our character's beliefs. But we also get a cool bonus with our fate point. We can spend a fate point to reroll all sixes as new dice or use a wise. So it gives us a mechanical benefit. And before we go too much deeper, I really want to really quickly here talk about essentially the system of this game. You are going to roll, you're going to assemble a pool of D6. This game only uses D6s. And the more skilled, the better you are at something, you're going to have more of these D6s, and you're going to roll them all. And you are trying to get successes, or I can't remember what they call them. Successes. A 4, 5, and 6 are successes. A 1, 2, and 3 are traitors or failures. So in other words, each die has a 50-50 chance of being either a success or a failure. And we are trying to get to a certain DC, which this game calls an objective or an ob. It says OB, ob. So like objective 3 means that you need to get to 3 successes. So you're going to roll those dice and try to get to at least 3, 4, 5s, and 6s. All right. So belief already shows us that there is a part of this game that cares about role playing. Goal is something that you are going to write down as your character's goal. Now, I should also note that things like belief and goal and instinct, they're somewhat mutable. There are things that you can change. There are things that you will change. This is important because as your character changes, you want to want to change these things, but also there's sort of a meta game to this, and that is okay. This is what Crane games, in my opinion, are all about. If you are metagaming and car-opping and, min-maxing the shit out of a Crane game, you're actually going to create an incredible, amazing role-playing, cinematic story, narrative experience, right? By playing to the game, you are going to be empowered by the game, right? The game cares about these things and it rewards these things. So a goal could be very lofty, could be a massive, huge goal, but then think about how often you're going to be able to achieve that goal. Not very often. So, but when you get a goal, you get a persona point. And persona points, like fate points, are things that we want to earn. So what this means is part of the fun of this game, or part of the skill of this game, is setting a goal that your GM doesn't say is reaching. There's a whole section in this book that is fantastic about basically being like, don't be don't be a punk. Don't be an asshole. Like, everyone can tell if you are just trying to be shit, being a little shit-eating, have a shit-eating grin on your face and trying to just squeak something by the system. Like, a goal has to be meaningful, but we don't want it to be so over the top that it becomes, impossible to earn. All right. And then we also see instinct. Using an instinct to aid yourself or the group earns a fate point. All right. So again, these are three things about our character that already show us this game cares a little bit more about our character's motivations, our goals, our instincts, our beliefs than maybe a traditional D&D game. So then we get into the real heart of Torchbearer. Okay. These are called conditions. Okay. Now in Torchbearer, you don't really have what we would call hit points. So when your character fails, you have something called a health and willpower, but it's not really like health is sort of almost like your constitution, and will is sort of like, your wisdom or your willpower. So if you are familiar with games that have come later on, like Thirsty Sword Lesbians or Avatar Legends, we are familiar with games that use conditions as a way of tracking our character's sort of status. And in this case, these are the conditions of Torchbearer. And as you progress through the dungeon, as you progress through the adventure, your character, should they fail checks or should things not go their way, they are going to start to accumulate these conditions. And eventually, you will accumulate the dead condition, and your character will be, you guessed it, dead. So these are not only sort of role-playing forward narrative ideas. Hey, your character is angry, so your character has to, you should play your character like they're mad or angry. But it also has a effect in the game. You cannot use your wises. Think of wises as like, your lore skills, your knowledge skills, or you can't use any of your traits to your benefit. So this means that your character is upset and isn't thinking straight. So they literally lose out on mechanical benefits in the game. But where this game gets particularly awesome, if you want to call it that, let's see if we can find it really quick here. All right. Okay. All right, here we go. Again, this game is very procedural. All right. And if you're familiar, maybe I go to the whiteboard here, actually. All right. All right. So if you're familiar with BX D&D, aka Moldve Basic, then you'll know that in Basic D&D there was this idea, right, of the exploration or kind of procedural turn. Pathfinder 2 actually kind of has this idea as well. So like in BX D&D, you had this procedure where, every 10 minutes, was what they would kind of call a turn. And a lot of the things in the game of BX D&D were sort of timed on these 10-minute turns. Things like, random encounters, how long your light lasted, how long your spells lasted, right? So there was this idea that as time ticked by, you were sort of getting more and more sort of ground down, right? You were sort of being the dungeon is not a vacation place, right? It's not a place to be. So they took this idea and they created something here called the grind. Okay. Now this is where the game gets a little bit weird, but basically in Torchbearer, the party gets something called a turn. And in a turn, which is kind of a vague amount of time, to be honest with you, it's not 10 minutes like it was in BXD&D. A turn is sort of a period of time where things are happening. Okay. So after the player group takes 4 of these turns, I should say, after 3 turns, and then after the 4th turn, all characters earn a condition. Earn as being particularly brutal. It says, if your character has no other conditions, you suffer the hungry and thirsty condition. So what does that mean? It means that when we start off in the dungeon, okay, our character is going to be fresh, right? We would have this fresh marked on our sheet. And one of the caveats of the fresh condition is it goes away as soon as you gain any other condition. And it does not restore, even if you eliminate those conditions, until you've gone back to town and you've had time to rest and refresh, like at an inn or a tavern, okay? So being fresh is really great. You start off, you're really fresh. But after 4 turns, okay, on the adventure in the dungeon, our characters become hungry and thirsty. Now, keep in mind, there are other things that can cause our character to become hungry or thirsty or angry or afraid, right? Like a failed check or a conflict with a monster that doesn't go our way. But just being in the dungeon will grind you down. If your character has no other conditions, you become hungry and thirsty. If we're already hungry and thirsty, then we become exhausted. Okay? If we're already exhausted and hungry, we become angry. If we're already angry and exhausted, we become sick. If we're already all of those, we become injury. And then the final one that we would become is afraid. And if we are all of those things, if all 6 of those are checked on our 4th turn, we die. We unceremoniously drop dead from exhaustion. And this is, by the way, the kind of language that Crane uses. And this is the kind of way that Crane writes books. Note that these conditions are imposed in a different order than on the character sheet to better reflect the grind of this kind of life and to keep you on your toes. So it's basically saying, like, this game has some things about it that some people do not like, which is this game rewards people who know how the game works. And it's okay with that. The rule book is kind of dense and kind of difficult to understand. There is a skill to playing this game and playing it well. And someone who plays Torchbearer better than other people play Torchbearer is going to do better than other people. So someone who comes in and says, they look at the conditions and they go, oh, this is the order that the grind goes in. But someone who's read the book and knows what's happening understands that this actually can go in a different order as things are happening. So the first thing to note here is that there is very much a time limit that comes into going into one of these games, that the longer you're in the dungeon, the more tests you make, the more things that you do, the more you are going to suffer from this grind. Okay. And the dungeon will sort of grind you down into dust. So that conditions are probably like one of the most important things to understand in the game, because, a lot of what you're going to do in this game is sort of revolves around these conditions. All right. So let us, let's go here. I feel like a turn here needs to be about 3 hours minimum. So again, a turn is no particular length of time. Again, this game is not simulationist. It is emulationist. And you'll really see this later on when we get to what we call the good idea. Literally a rule or a rule called the good idea rule. Okay. So there's a couple things I want to talk about here. We see the usual things here about playing the game. This is a role-playing game. Manage your spotlight, pass your make rolls, make tests. Most of the time you're in control of what your character does and doesn't do. You get to describe what your character's good at, what his or her quirks are, and what he or she is not so good at. Every so often, you're going to lose control of your character or foeman. When you attempt to do something and fail a test, the GM gets to take over and describe something that went wrong. The GM can tell everyone about something your character did that was misguided or even bad, or the GM can describe an unforeseen effect that your actions have caused. He gets to stick it to you for a moment. It's painful, but new problems add to the fun of the game. All checks in this game are big deals. Okay. We talk about, not planning, unplanned stories, play to find out what happens, etc. Now, again, look at, the structure of this game is written very differently. Table chatter. When you play this game, you do not spend the entire session in character. You have moments of characterization interspersed with listening to other players, dice rolls, rules, references, and table chatter. Table chatter is our term for giving the other players advice about the game. This advice doesn't come from your character. It comes from you. Table chatter is important to this game. You should give each other advice and talk about the best strategies, but be polite and respectful. Do not boss another player around. If another player doesn't want your advice, let him or her choose their correct course of action. Always listen first, then discussion. Make suggestions, but do not lobby. There's a difference between contributing by tossing out an idea and arguing for a certain path. This is a game that very much, again, it's trying to recreate that experience of playing BXD&D in the 80s where, it's a role-playing game and we're playing our characters in character. But so much of the game is us playing the game, like the players. It's us discussing things and figuring things out. And I always really, really like that because that is, for me, a lot of the fun of role-playing games is, again, people associate role-playing with being like, I'm in character and I'm talking with a bad accent. I think a lot of groups play like this, Ayla. I think a ton of groups play like this, but I think this type of style of play has been sort of demonized or viewed as lesser in sort of the modern day take on what a role-playing game should or should not be. That was the term they used. Scoundrels. I couldn't remember what it was called. I said traitors, but it's called scoundrels. And again, they also talk about, description forward. They say here, don't say I scout ahead. Don't say I want to use my scout skill, right? Just to do it. Think in terms of, what it would look like inside of our made up narrative. The game, let me see if I can find it here. Is this? Here we go. What kind of game is this? Torchbearer is a role-playing game, and it's part of a brand of games that Burning Will headquarters has been producing for over 10 years. It's about making difficult choices, and it involves exploring the world and your character through the game, rules, and systems. Let me say that again. It's about making difficult choices, and it involves exploring the world and your character through the game rules and systems. Okay, this is a game where setting is mechanics is setting, right? So very much so that this is a game where part of exploring the game means exploring the actual rules of the game. But look, you're not going to read this every day. Okay, people, you're not going to read this all the time. This is a hard game. It's not a simple game. as if we need to really double emphasize this. There are many moving parts, and it's not possible to experience the whole game in even one or two sessions. If you prefer lighter games, there are many excellent choices available for you designed by our friends. If you're ready to sink your teeth into a good game that will reward you for mastering the system over 10 or 20 sessions, this is the game for you. Now, a lot of people say that Loot Crane games are very gatekeepy. I just think they're being very honest. And the authors here are basically telling you, well, straight up, this is a hard game. It is not a simple game. And if you want something more rules light or something else, go there. There's a ton of really great ones out there. You should go check a look at those, right? So this is a game that rewards good play, is how I would describe it. But in this case, good play can mean making very character-driven decisions. All right. So we get into the structure of play. All right. The game is meant to be mastered in about a dozen sessions of 2 to 4 hours each. Enough sessions to level and maybe make something of yourself. That's our recommendation. But you can play for fewer or more sessions if you want. If it's your very first session, you'll create characters and then play for a bit. During a session, the players use their characters to tackle an adventure presented by the GM. A session of play consists of the prologue, then one or more adventure phases, one or more camp phases, and possibly a town phase. So going back to our whiteboard here. So in Torchbearer, the idea is that your characters leave town, right, ready to go into an adventure. So they go to the adventure. They go to the dungeon. Okay. And during the course of the adventure, all right, they are going to be taking turns trying to make progress, to solve, beat monsters, overcome deadly traps, solve mysteries, solve clues. But as you adventure, your character is going to acquire conditions and other problems, which will lead you to wanting to do something called the camp phase. Now, the camp phase is optional and actually has some requirements, but a camp phase allows your character to basically, while out on the adventure, to sort of sit around and maybe heal up some conditions, maybe repair certain items so that your character can go back into the adventure phase where they can continue to accumulate progress towards their goals. And then eventually at the end of this cycle, when the resources are completely tapped out or when, your characters are too full of treasure and loot, do you return back to town? So there is a defined structure for this game of how they expect you to play it. And it is based around this idea of, adventuring, camping, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So we use dice. D6s, 4, 5s, and 6s are successes. 1, 2s, and 3s are scoundrels. Obstacles are integral to this game. The difficulty of a test is often described as the obstacle. Obstacles are descriptive. A steep climb, a rusty lock, an angry dog. But they are also described as a number, usually 1 to 10. The number, it tells us how many successes we need to pass the test. Okay? So pretty simple. Now, if we fail a test, we do not succeed. And instead, the GM introduces a twist or gives you a condition in exchange for getting what you want. So if we're familiar at all with Powered by the Apocalypse games, right? And again, this game came out after PBDA, but Burning Wheel came out before Apocalypse World, or sort of around the same time. Of course, all these people were all like talking to each other back in the day in the Forge forums. This should be very similar. This should be something we're very aware with. Making a test in this game is a big deal. And as a result, if you fail, there will be something that happens. either basically the GM gets to make a move. They will either introduce what's called a twist, or they will give you a condition in exchange for getting what you want. Yes, you succeed. However, it takes you too long and you start getting really frustrated and you become angry. Or yes, you succeed, but by the time you're finished, you feel your stomach rumbling and you are hungry. Okay. And so you get the hungry and thirsty condition. All right. So twists or conditions are sort of what happens on a failure. There is never a result of nothing happens. Okay. Sometimes we might add dice to our pool, or we subtract dice from our pool. We can also add successes or subtract successes depending on certain aspects of the game. So again, basic terms here for the game. All right. So an adventurer's essential guide to life on the road. So before we start talking about character creation, what is up, Pumpkin? What is up? I want to talk about a couple other things about this game that I just think are really, really interesting. All right. So, and again, these are things that you'll either love it or you'll hate it. Okay. So I mentioned before that when you are playing the game, there are these turns. Okay. So like a BX in D&D turn. Okay. However, in Torchbearer, we talked about this. There we go. In Torchbearer, we talked about this. So you have turn 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the grind occurs, right? And then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the grind occurs. Okay. So as we're playing through this game, as a turn passes to the next, as the turn passes, after enough of these, we grind. So what is a turn? So the answer is, okay, you ready for this? Okay. When someone makes a check. That is what defines a turn. So if your character wants to investigate an ancient runes written onto a wall depicting an ancient mystery, the GM may call for a some sort of scholar check, and you say, yeah, that, and you discuss it with your party and everybody agrees, and you go ahead and make your scholar check. Pass or fail, that was a turn. So if you go into a room and one player says, I'm going to go do this, and another player says, I'm going to go do that, and another player says, I'm going to go do that, and another player says, I'm going to go do a fourth thing, okay? And you do 4 things and you make 4 checks, guess what? 4 turns have just passed and we grind. So again, this is something you either love or hate about this game. This is very much a game about the party. Each individual person on the party brings a certain amount of, skills to the party. And to a certain extent, you're going to be sort of pulling and lobbying for your character because you want to be making checks and advancing your character. But there is a definite sense here of it's not about you making individual choices for your character. It's about the group of players at the table, okay, all of us, and then deciding, okay, and you know what, but we're talking back and forth, and then, everyone goes, yeah, I agree. Okay. Derek's character, right? Cesarum should make the scholar check. And then it's like, okay, we've agreed that that's what we want to do. And we're going to go ahead, and Cesarum is going to make that check. So it's a much more sort of discussing with your group type of situation. It's not one where you just, everybody's yelling out and spamming out. I want to do this. I want to do this. He's doing this. I want to go over there. Doesn't work that way. Okay. And obviously you can see that you need to make the most of your checks. Okay. Because if you waste them, you're going to quickly burn through your turns and you're going to start grinding. You're going to start accumulating conditions. So you need to be very cautious about this. Now, we mentioned before in the play pattern, okay, that while you're adventuring, okay, and taking these turns, there is an opportunity for you to go to camp. And while you're in camp, you can try to recover from some of these conditions. In fact, if we look at our character sheet, we can see on the sheet that if we're angry or we're afraid or we're exhausted, we can make a ob 2 or ob 3 or ob 4 check, okay, in something like camp to try to recover from that condition. So how do we earn checks to camp, right? Because you might say to yourself, well, okay, so what we'll do is we'll go into the dungeon. This is what I would do because I'm an elite player. And again, you'll either love this or hate this. We'll go into the dungeon and someone will make a check, and then someone else will make a check, and then someone else will make a check. And then before we get to the fourth turn, we'll just go and camp and we'll recover any conditions, and then we'll just rinse, repeat, and we'll do that over and over and over again until we have just beaten everything and suffered no penalties whatsoever. Okay? As a result, though, guess what? You can't do that. In order to make a check in camp, you have to earn it. Okay? These are called checks. You have to earn them while you are playing in the dungeon, in the adventure phase. If you do not earn checks, then if your character goes to camp, you can accomplish nothing. You can't do anything. You can only use checks, all right, you can only make checks that you've earned. So you have to earn checks. And then it says right here on your sheet, this is on your character sheet, by the way, earning checks. There are no free checks. So you can earn them by using your traits against yourself. All right. So what does that mean? Well, traits are kind of like fate aspects, right? I might have the trait where it says I'm brash, right? And this can give me some benefits. You can see that if I am brash level 1, I get +1 die once per session when making a check. If I'm brash level 2, I get +1 die for every single roll. And if I get brash level 3, I get +1 success on any successful or tied roll. So that means it's basically the same thing as a die, but it counts as a 4, 5, or 6. It's an automatic success. Big benefit. Okay, but how do I earn checks with my brash? Well, it's really simple. When I am making a check, I can choose to either give myself a penalty to my die roll, okay? Or I can give my opponent bonus dice in the case that we're making an opposed check. Or if me and my opponent tie, I can say he or she wins, I'll lose, but it's because of my brashness, as long as it makes sense within the system of the game. So what this means is if you do one of these, you can earn 1 check or you can earn 2 checks, depending on which one it is. This means that in order to mechanically play this game, you must role play. You literally cannot function without using your traits against yourself. If you do not use your traits against yourself, you will not earn checks. If you do not earn checks, it will be very bad for you because you will not be able to go to camp and recover from conditions or do any of the things that you would otherwise want to do in camp. All right. So again, it is, if you are playing this game mechanically, okay, you are playing this game narratively. Okay. You are playing it with a role-playing bend. Okay. So again, this is very, very strange structure for a lot of things. All right. So traits are great to have because they give you options for making, getting you benefits and also getting checks by using them against yourself. And so part of this skill, I said before, now I feel bad because some of this is like things that you should figure out on your own. But you're here, you're on a Sunday night, you're probably a patron. So, I'll give you the inside edge. Part of the skill of this game is like recognizing when you're making a check that you're going to fail anyways. And since you're going to fail anyways, you might as well give up the penalty, okay, in order to get a check back, right? Because the GM might say something happens and you're forced to make a check, and you look at it and you say, I'm not going to pass this anyways. And you think, okay, is there a way that I could use one of my traits against myself negatively so that I'll get a penalty to this roll because I'm going to fail this thing anyways? Or maybe everybody else wants to go camp and you're about to go camp. So if you fail a check, it's not the end of the world because you'll have a chance to recover from it. So maybe you set up a situation where you want to, potentially go into a situation and use your traits against yourself just to earn a check because the consequence of the failure won't matter that much. But wait, there's more. This game uses diegetic skill progression, okay? Which means your skills go up as you use them, all right? You'll notice that every single skill in the game has a rating, which is blank, which is essentially, how many dice you're rolling. But you'll see that next to it is a series of dots with P's and F's, passes, failures. In order for, again, you don't have to spend experience points for this or anything like that. This just happens. If you accumulate enough passes and enough failures, then your skill goes up. So you could be in a situation where you really want your cartographer skill to improve. All you need is one more failure. So you look for an opportunity to find a tough cartographer check because you want to fail it so that your cartographer skill goes up. But in order to maximize your chances of failure, you find a trait that you can use against yourself, which it decreases your chance of succeeding and gives you checks that you can earn in the camp phase. Now, again, is this very complex? Is this a game that every part that I've talked about this game so far is interacting with each other. Conditions interact with traits, which interact with checks, which interact with skills. All right. This is a watch. Now, Burning Wheel might be some, $10,000 Rolex. All right. But this is still a complex movement, right? That uses a lot of interlocking pieces. But the point is, number one, if you use them, you are going to experience something. But number two, if you use them well, if you use them smartly, if you use them correctly, you are going to get better outcomes than, let's just say, somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're doing and they go and play this game. All right. So, these are our skills. And that is how we earn checks, and that is how we earn traits. And while we're here, we'll finish taking a look here at the character sheet. So your character has something called will and health, which are, again, is like your base mental power, your base physical power. And we'll get into nature, but nature is really, really, it's a really, really cool part of this game. And it has to do in Mouseguard. It's really cool, but in this game, this is how you really make the races feel very different from each other because your nature is tied to your race or your stock, as the game calls. You also have two abilities that are used in town, which is resources, which is how much money you have, and circles, which is how much social connection, how much power you have there in that respect. Then on the back of our character sheet, we have an inventory. You'll note that there are not that many slots. Okay. And everything takes up a slot. There's no bulk here. There's no weight here. Everything that you would own or carry goes into one of these slots on your head, on your neck, on your hands, on your torso, in your belt, on your feet. And if you're carrying a backpack, then you can have more slots. But wait, why wouldn't I carry a backpack? So you'll see here that the backpack takes up 2 slots on your torso. So if we were playing, we would write down, hold on a second, actually here. Here we go. Let me go over to here. So if we were playing and I had a backpack, I would write backpack here in the torso. And then for those 2 slots, I now open up 6 slots in my backpack or satchel, right? Which is awesome, right? Now I have 6 extra slots of a thing. But note, it says factor for dungeoneer and fighter. What does that mean? Well, factor is this game's term of saying something that might make something more difficult. Fighter checks basically mean if your character is involved in a combat. Dungeoneer means if your character is involved in any sort of, crawling around pits, skulking through the dungeon. If you wear a backpack in this game, guess what? You fight. It is harder for you to fight. It is harder for you to run, jump, swim, climb trees. All right. Because wearing a backpack full of stuff is not easy. And so, sure, you could wear a backpack, but it will affect you. So you may not want to wear a backpack. You may just want to carry a satchel. Do you need all those equipment slots? Yes or no? Maybe you do. Maybe you just don't get in any fights, right? Maybe you stay out of those kind of conflicts so that you have more room for treasure and for loot. All right. So even the inventory system in this game is something that you can sort of, dare I say it, min-max the shit out of. Okay. But again, a lot of this comes from playing the game and experiencing it and learning how the game works. All right. Spell books, spells, prayers. We're not going to get all that today. All right. So let me see if there's anything else that's like super important to understand. All right. I don't think so. Let me see if there's anything in chat real quick here. Pumpkin says that, he likes this. Big RP with big G. Yes, that's correct. I could sense some PBTA vibes here in the sense of looking for ways to use your moves to optimize your gameplay / earn progression. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, this is where the game gets real crazy. Let me see if I can find this easily. Okay, here it is. Now, Ayla, I'm thinking about you here. Okay, I'm thinking about you, the way that you play these games. Remember what I said before, that in Torchbearer, when you go into the adventure, okay, the adventure phase, which again usually is going to be some sort of dungeon or something like that, you have these turns, which every time someone makes a check, you are checking off the turn. And every 4 turns, that is when the grind occurs and everybody earns a condition. Okay? So again, you can imagine, if you remember, the first condition that you earn is thirsty and hungry. Okay? And thirsty and hungry is fixable. You can actually fix hungry and thirsty in the adventure phase by, you guessed it, eating a ration, right? Or drinking from your water skin. But guess what? This is not Pathfinder 2. Okay. Your character is not going to be able to carry 17 weeks worth of rations. It's just not the way it works. Okay. Now, it could be the situation where you're like, wait a second. So if my character got hungry and thirsty like 3 or 4 times, I would have to eat 3 or 4 rations. Yes. Maybe each ration represents a small, bag of chips. But the point of the matter is your character could become hungry and thirsty many times. But as you're sitting there grinding, your character is going to keep becoming hungry and thirsty. And if your character is already hungry and thirsty, they might become exhausted or injured or sick or all these other things. Okay. So what this means is that turns are a really precious resource. But like I said, what makes a turn happen is when somebody makes a check, right? When they try to do something in the game and the GM says that is going to be a skill check. That is going to be a haggle check. That is going to be a scholar check. That is going to be a fighter check. When that happens, that is the action. That's like the action for that entire turn. Enter the good idea. I'm just going to read this. While adventuring, your players will often encounter hazards that require inventive or even desperate measures to overcome. They must use their gear creatively, puzzle out a clever plan, and act as a team. If you think, talking to the GM here, the players have come up with a good idea, a smart use of their gear, their spells, or even their bodies, then there is no need to roll the dice for test. No need to spend a check, and it doesn't cost them a turn. Simply say to them, that's a good idea. Then describe the effect of their action. It could be as simple as, yep, you hide. Or it could be, so you want to set up a trap by placing this bucket over the archway and using the rope as a tripwire? Got it. If there's a disagreement about your interpretation, discuss the idea until you reach an understanding. If you still think it's a good idea, proceed. If you think the idea is risky or mad, perhaps it is time to call for a test. If the action the players are describing would merit a twist or condition, but the description from the players is a good idea, you should describe the outcome of the action and move on. A good idea should definitely change the situation. Use the good idea rule to set up big moments. Bypass the minutia, focus on what's important, and highlight the actually exciting actions. If the players have a great plan for an ambush in the fern forest but need to cover themselves with fern fronds first, don't make them test scavenger. Tell them it's a good idea. Describe their actions, then cut to the scout test for the ambush. Right? So it's just, boom, you move right ahead. You get yes. But see, there's actually a mechanical benefit to this. When you say that's a good idea, the players get the benefit, right? They get what happened, but they didn't have to use an action. They didn't have to use a turn, which means that they can get more things done. In this game, skills are very broad and the condition rules are very punishing. If you focus too closely on fine-grained details, you will crush your players. So now that being said, it's not a free lunch. It says, in general, good ideas move the action along, but they do not grant special abilities like bonuses, advancement, or earn rewards. So if your character does something that's really smart and you get to, you get to bypass having to make the scavenger test here, that's great. You didn't risk failure. You didn't have to roll the dice. You didn't eat up a turn, but you also don't get to mark that you passed a check because, well, you didn't make a check, right? It's almost like you were using something that was well within your character's comfort level. And so you didn't really advance in any meaningful way. Right. So, that is where sort of this game has, again, that sort of nod to player skill, not PC skill, player skill. And it basically says, if your players can come up with great ideas and use the resources on their character, their spells, their crazy plans, their equipment in a smart way that you nod and say, that's a good idea, then they can make advancements and not have to use up those valuable turns in the course of the game. But yes, there are no free lunches in this game. Okay. And let me see if this is in here. Here we go. So there is a section in this thing called reaching. Again, this is the rule book literally calling this out. Okay. So this is talking about using traits, right, to benefit yourself or using traits against yourself, right? These are those things like brash or, courageous, right? These are the traits. And there's a section in here. They specifically call it out. It's called reaching. There's a phenomenon with traits that we call reaching. It's a situation when a trait clearly does not fit, but a player is working really hard to convince the group that it'll work. This is not creative. It's just short of begging, and it is certainly always bull. If you feel a player is reaching, tell them so. Give them a moment to readjust, and if they don't have anything better to add, move on. The trait does not apply. Absolutely, Ayla. It's another point of decision, right? Because you may want to make the check, right? So you deliberately create a more harebrained scheme because you specifically want to use the check. That is actually 100% accurate. Again, a lot of it comes down to how you play the game. So let us let's see here. I know we're sort of, I'm trying to highlight like the core aspect of these points. You know what I want to talk about before we get into like the character creation? I do want to talk about nature. All right. So, nature is part of your character's stock. Okay. So it's part of your character's, right? You could be a dwarf, an elf, a halfling, or a human in this game. All right. And let's see if we can find them. Here we go. All right. Nature is a special ability, unlike all other abilities. There are 3 descriptors attached to each character's natures. These determine how your nature will be used during play. All right. So in the course of the game, right, we as a player are going to have this nature, which determines or is based off of whether or not our character is an elf, a dwarf, a halfling, or, you guessed it, a human. Okay. So let's say, for example, that our character is an elf. So we can see here, it says, if you're an elf, write nature elf on your character sheet. Your descriptors are singing, remembering, and hiding. So what we would do is we would come in here and we would say that our nature is elf. And our descriptors are singing, remembering, and hiding. And just for completeness sake, the descriptors for a dwarf, the dwarven nature, are delving, crafting, and avenging a grudge. The descriptors for halflings are sneaking, riddling, and merrymaking. And the traits for a human are boasting, demanding, and running. So the way that this game works is your character, nature, can be a really, really powerful stat. Okay. And most characters start with a ranking of 3 in their nature. And your nature rating sort of determines how much like an elf, or how much are you like a member of your, it's almost like being an adventurer makes you an oddity. Okay. Adventurers aren't normal people. Okay. Humans, right? They start families, and they form communities, and they farm, or they blacksmith, and they stay in town, and maybe they try to, better their community, and they boast of their great, of their ancestors' deeds, and they demand more land and more rights for themselves, right? That is what humans do. Okay. Elves hide in the forest, and they sing songs, and they remember when the world was young, and they were, elves in this game are immortal, right? So elves, kind of exist in this sort of ephemeral state. They don't go adventure. So in this game, nature is ranked on a scale from 0 to 7. And as your nature becomes closer to 7, you become more, well, in our character's case, elf-like, right? And as we get closer to 0, we become more like a weird hobo. All right. Now, again, you want to talk about mechanical incentives. The nature game is really, really important. So the thing about your nature is if your character were to go and do any of these things, like sing or remember or hide or anything else creative that you think that you could get away with while using your description, then you get to roll with your nature rating. So I would get to roll 3 dice for this skill. So you could imagine that if my character had a elf rating of 5, right, they would be very good at singing and remembering and hiding. They could do it with 5 dice. That's a huge number. The problem is, in this game, when you start to use your nature, just like when you would use a skill, this can make your number, your elf nature, go up. So we use our elf nature a bunch, right? We pass some, we fail some, but at the end of the session, we've done enough and it goes up to 6. Okay? Well, we use it some more, and at the end of the session, it goes up to 7. Okay? If we end a session with our nature at 7, our character retires. Our character becomes an NPC. Our character decides the life of adventuring is no longer for them. They journey, they get onto a boat and they sail into the undying lands to the west. All right. So, Ayla said, I'd love to stick around, but I have to catch the VOD. Gonna see if I can teach my players how to play some Forbidden Lands. Good luck teaching them Forbidden Lands. That's awesome. And keep in mind, Ayla, sometime hopefully in December, we'll do Forbidden Lands Part 2. So hopefully you'll have enough experience from teaching people that we can have some interesting discussion points to add on there. So mechanically, having a high nature is really, really powerful because it's a great, easy way to get access to these dice, because we didn't touch on this yet, but you can also, nature also sort of represents how much inner strength you have. How much do you believe in yourself? How much, grit and determination and power do you have within yourself, right? A character who has very low nature score is sort of a wanderer, a nomad, a drifter. They don't really have any sense of self. They don't have any sense of identity. A character with a really high nature score is very sure of who they are and what they are doing. And so you can also use your nature score to add to other skill checks in the game. So this is incredibly powerful. And this is called tapping your nature. And let me see if we have something here. And when you tap your nature, you can add, let's see if we have things here really quick here. So yes, you have to spend a persona point. So remember those things that we were talking about before here on your character sheet? You can spend 1 point to add 1 dice, or you can tap into your nature. So if a character has accumulated persona points, they can use those to tap into their nature and basically give themselves a tremendous boost. Basically, the idea is you are sort of choosing to use your innate self to go do some adventuring shit instead of being like an exemplary elf. And so, yes, you get to basically take all that powerful elfdomness and you get to use it for making some, dungeoneering check. And it can provide a big bonus. But the problem is when you tap into your nature, it can also affect your nature. And your nature can start to go down, right? And so your nature might go down to a 2 or a 1 because we are becoming less elf-like and we are becoming more like the weird hobo adventurer. Same as before, if we ever get to 0 and we end the session with our nature at 0, our character retires. They're no longer an adventurer. They're just some weird, crazy person that maybe goes off and lives in the woods, or mutters about secrets that the man was not meant to know, or basically runs off screaming into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Basically, we have pushed our adventurer too far. They are no longer grounded to any sense of reality or community, and they have just become a full-on crazy person. And so nature is something that you want to balance between the two of them, because while having a really, really high nature makes you really, really elf-like and gives you all these bonuses, talk about mechanical incentives, the higher your nature is, the harder it is for you to learn new skills, right? Because when you have a really high nature, your character is an elf. They are super elf-like. And so you're really good at singing and remembering and hiding. You're not so good at learning things like armorer, commander, criminal, dungeoneer, fighter, haggler, hunter, all the skills in the game. Okay? Manipulator. If your nature score is low, there's not a lot there for you to get a lot of help out of. But because you are so much in the sort of adventurer mindset, it's actually easier for you to learn new sort of adventurer skills. So there are pros and cons to having a high nature or a low nature. There could be advantages. Having a low nature means that you are able to learn skills quickly. Having a high nature means that you can tap your nature and get a really big, significant bonus from doing so. So again, it's a very interconnected, complex system, but it is very, very much a interesting one. Now, keep in mind that all of this is happening in the context of a dungeon, right? These characters are experiencing these, moments while playing essentially in a, kind of a classic Dungeons and Dragons style game. So it's very, 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 it's a very, very interesting experience. All right. Now, as I said before, this is a complex game, and I'm not going to try to teach it, step by step, bit by bit to everybody. But is there anything that anybody specifically in chat maybe has a question on, or would like some more information about, or something that sounded interesting that you think would be worth taking a look at? Because I'd be happy to answer it. Again, we may do multiple ones of these, but multiple sessions of these, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds of exactly how every single thing in this game mechanically works. And quite frankly, it's been a while since I've played it at the table, so I'd probably get some stuff wrong. But I'd also point out that part of the fun of the game is figuring out some of the mechanics. Yes, Beowulf. Torchbearer has circles right there. So, circles are your character's, circles represent your connections, your contacts, and your ability to find people. You find people to work for you, to answer questions, or help out, and it is rated 1 to 10. So it's basically like how much social currency do you have? Does your character have? And by the way, here's just an example. Like, when you start off as a dwarf adventurer, you start off with will of 3, health of 5. These are your starting skills. You might have a trait born of earth and stone, what weapons you can use, what armor you can use. How is this game in play? It looks great on paper. Okay. So it's real talk time. Here's the thing. When I first introduced this game, and by the way, I saw somebody mention about, Darkest Dungeons was, Lug says, I'm pretty sure Torchbearer heavily inspired the RPG game Darkest Dungeon. Yes, Yes. Darkest Dungeons was a love letter to Torchbearer. All of if Darkest Dungeons is sort of like the video game version of Torchbearer to a certain extent. Obviously it's got its own little unique takes, but it is very, very much inspired by that. Yes. So the main thing is when this game first came out, when did this game come out? 2000. So Torchbearer came out like right near the end of 4th edition. So like 2012. And at that time I had started to play, Dungeon World and Powered by the Apocalypse games. And had been kind of exposed to these wider game ideas that I had only dabbled in before. But my group was still fairly rooted in D&D 3rd edition, D&D 4th edition, Pathfinder, where, there was a one-to-one connection between reality and the game world. So when I first introduced this game and concepts like a turn being this vague sense of time, or the idea that, well, what do you mean we all can't do something? Well, I mean, you can, it'll just take 4 turns. Well, that's stupid. Why does it take longer? Because aren't we all doing them at the same time? Well, yeah, but you're conflating turn with the actual passage of time. That's not really what it means. So these gamist concepts, everyone was fine with them playing 4th edition in combat, right? Like a lot of people were very okay with 4th edition being like, oh, that character is marked. But what does that really mean? Well, it means they have a -2 penalty to attack roll. Yeah, but the fighter's like on the other side of the battlefield. Like, how is he disrupting that monster's attack? It's fine, whatever. But when you started applying that to like the actual structure of the game, I found that some people really balked at that. And especially because people felt like, I want to do my thing, right? I, the wizard, want to take my action, and the fighter wants to take the fighter action, and the cleric wants to do something. We all want to do something. And the fact of the matter is that's not how this game works. It is outside of, combat or whatever. You don't get to play your character. Like, you're always role-playing your character. You're always being your character, but you don't get to take game actions whenever you want. All right. So yeah, I mean, and you know what, Beowulf? There is nothing wrong with that. I have met a lot of people who that really grates on them. The idea of 4 people doing 4 different things at the same time, being 4 turns, kind of grates on me. Yep. You would be right to feel that grates on you. A lot of people do. And we didn't get to it, but this extends to a special type of turn action, because I said before the turn is a skill check, but a turn could also be a conflict. Okay. And a conflict in this game is a special type of thing that can occur during the course of the game. And conflict is equivalent to, going into initiative order. But as before, this is no D20 game. There is no sense of every player gets a turn. It does not work that way. Okay. Conflict is a game. Again, if when I first introduced Torchbearer to my group, to people like Tim and people like Aaron, they really hated Torchbearer conflicts, and they didn't realize it because they hadn't read Burning Wheel, but they would have really hated Burning Wheel conflicts as well, because the way that conflicts work in Torchbearer is not every PC gets a turn, every monster gets a turn. Team PCs gets to do something, and team monsters gets to do something. And we just roll like one set of dice and we see what happens. Right. And the only difference between conflicts and other skill checks is conflicts have a series. They might repeat a number of times. Okay. And each side has a rating called their disposition. Think of it like hit points, but conflicts don't have to necessarily be combat. Conflicts can be, here we go. They can be banish, capture, convince, drive off, kill, pursue, flee, trick, riddle, etc. So conflicts can be used for any time you want to sort of get into the minutia of a particular instance. So there's this idea called disposition. You know, how much stake, you know, how much money do you have in the game? And so as each side takes actions, the other side's disposition lowers, and eventually one side's disposition goes to 0, and they have lost the conflict. But the side that won the conflict, they have to offer a concession depending on how much disposition they lost. So this is another example which used to drive my players crazy, because while you're in the conflict, you're just, you're making dice rolls, and, maybe the party's disposition is going down, but the goblins that they are, fighting are going down as well. And then it's really close, neck and neck. And then the party is here, and then the goblins finally go to 0, which means the party wins. They get what they wanted. But the goblins brought the party down so much, the players owe the goblins a major concession. And I found that some people did not like that. They like the binary nature of D20 games, where it's we all win or we just TPK, right? It's all or nothing. It's never shades of gray. It's never gradients. And so in that respect, it plays fine, but it can cause people to get really, they can start to want to they can start to push up against the rules, because they are feeling like it's cramping their style. And that is the thing that I have kind of seen the most, Pumpkin, is, it plays fine. The rule book is, it could use a little help. I mean, maybe second edition's a little bit clearer, but the thing is some people have a really hard time with the idea of the party taking a turn rather than each individual character, because in the simulation of their brain, right, of course I can be doing something while he's doing something while they're doing something, right? That's how things work in the real world. That's how they should work in this fantasy real world, but it's not that, right? And so that can, that can break people's minds in that respect. So it's actually really, really cool. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting is very quickly you realize, again, this is me sharing insider information with you about Torchbearer. So when you go into a conflict, the GM declares a conflict has begun when your actions have engaged with a monster or the environment in an important way. After you describe your actions, the GM can ask you a few questions to clarify. What are you trying to accomplish, and how are you going about it? Once your description is clear, the GM tells you what type of conflict you're involved in. That's right. The GM picks. If you win, you accomplish what you described at the start of the conflict. If the GM wins, you do not accomplish your goal, and the GM gets to decide what happens. Well, early on, when you're playing with D&D players and they encounter, and again, they're still thinking like D&D players, right? If you were a D&D player and you came across a group of hostile evil goblins, right, in the ruins of some ancient dwarven city, which you were trying to loot and plunder, and you encountered them, and I said, they're taking up positions, and you say, we're going to engage them. And I go, okay, what's your intent? Right? I think 99% of you out there would say, we're going to kill them. But if you look at militaries throughout, human history, most of the time, the goal of an army isn't to just kill every single member of the opposing army. That almost never happens. In fact, they kind of almost don't care if they really kill them, to a certain extent, right? They just want to win the field of battle, right? They want to force their opponents to run away. They want to force their opponents to flee. When you start off in Torchbearer, it is very common for players to denounce that their intention is what we call a kill conflict. Okay? When you try to slay your opponent, you put your own life on the line. This is almost always a mistake. And the reason is because you will lose disposition. Okay, your side will lose disposition in the fight. It is almost a given. It is almost for sure. And so when you owe a concession on a kill conflict, it can literally mean your PCs die. Okay, because people just aren't used to thinking about that in D20 games. And as a result, I'm trying to see if we get into the compromise here. So suggested compromise. So a compromise is what happens if you won, okay, but the other side has to, offer up something, right? Because they did okay as well. So you can see here that if the GM wins a kill conflict, the player's intent was to kill, you'll see killing is my business, okay? Here we go. If you chose the kill goal, then you put your life at risk as well. The rules are written from the player's perspective. When a compromise is reached, choose one of the options listed with the appropriate level. If you lose a kill conflict without any compromise, you and everyone else on your team is dead. The enemy is unharmed. If you lose a kill conflict, but you earned a minor compromise, you are killed, but choose one of the following. If you lose a conflict but earned a middle level compromise, you are killed, but et cetera, et cetera. If you tie a kill conflict, you and your opponents both die gloriously. Basically, when you choose a kill conflict, it's because it's personal. It's because you are willing to put up your character's life on the line, okay, your party's life on the line in order to win this fight. The fact of the matter is, most of the time, when you're like in a typical dungeon, you don't want to kill. You want to drive them off, okay? Maybe you want to capture them, but most of the time what you are trying to do is drive off the enemy, right? The goblins are here, you're in their territory. Sure, you might, in the fiction, in the narrative, we can imagine, maybe one or two of them gets killed, right? But the rest of them scatter and flee and run when we win. This gets us like 99%, like unless we have like some personal vendetta against these goblins that for some odd reason, like we must have them killed. This gets you what you need, but it doesn't, put you at risk. In fact, it even says here, often you encounter what you cannot kill, or perhaps killing is too risky. So instead you drive off your opponents. Use this conflict when you're trying to injure and drive off your opponents, or when you're simply standing your ground. I don't care about killing them. I want to win the battle. And so this is like one of the classic mistakes that I see people make all the time. And then, you get to the effects of the conflict, and suddenly people are dying and they're like, wait, I didn't, what killed me? And you're like, the fight to the death that you were just a part of. Again, people are used to thinking in these very D20 terms that like, in order for me to die, I have to be ground down through all of these hit points and all these other things. And, that's just simply not the case. I'll do as another example. When you attempt a skill check and fail, as part of the twist, the GM can give you any condition, but he cannot give you the dead condition unless your character is either injured or sick. Now, obviously, it still has to make sense within the course of the fiction, but once your character becomes injured or sick, if you have either of those conditions and you go to make a check and fail it, and it would be somewhat appropriate for me to do so, I may apply as a condition of a twist of that check, you're dead. So like once your character becomes injured or sick, it's like, you got to really pay attention. You got to be really, really careful because you're kind of, knocking on death's door, if you will. But again, that's how easy it is to die in this game. Is that, you could just be like, yeah. Now there is a anti-gotcha requirement here where you can't make a character dead if death is an option, you have to let the player know before they make the check. Yeah, I don't remember where it says it, but basically, like, you can't just be like, okay, well, I'm gonna, if a player's like, well, I'm gonna explore this, scout down this hallway, and I'm like, and their character's already injured, and I'll be like, okay, make the check. Oh, you fail. Oh, you're dead. Like, you can't do that. You have to let them know that, like, hey, this hallway that you're scouting out is, full of booby traps and, and death scythes. If your character fails this, death is on the line. So, and then they might decide, okay, I'm not going to do that. Again, they really do try to, make it so that you don't get, got. But again, the vibe of the game is very much one of, sort of torches and, limited resources and, kind of getting ground down by the course of the adventure. I should also point out that, like, going to town is not what it's all cracked up to be. When you go back to town, like, all of your rations and stuff like that rot, and you have to get rid of them. You have to buy new ones. When you go back to town, you have to pay a bunch of money. You have to pay taxes. Going to town is really, really, really a bad idea unless you have a lot of money. Okay. Cause you're an adventurer, right? Things are expensive for you. It'd be the equivalent of, like, you living, I don't own a house. I don't have an apartment. I only stay at, fancy hotels. This is like one of those things where it's like, the 5-minute workday doesn't really work here, because if your character goes to the dungeon and only, is there for like 2 or 3 turns and then goes, we took some conditions, we'll just go back to town and heal up. No, going back to town to heal up is not a great solution when you don't have a lot of money. In fact, when you go into town, there's random at tables. You could have, you could be arrested for going back to town. Additionally, you have to decide what you're doing at towns. And if you don't have enough money, okay, you might end up having to, like, sleep on the street. All right. It is, a brutal game in that respect. And so again, a lot of the common, problems that people have in D20 games don't really exist here, because they have created game mechanics specifically designed to sort of attack that. Again, the feeling that they're trying to emulate here is like, if you read the classic, like, Conan the Barbarian sword and sorcery, where Conan, in the last book, he found a king's treasure and a king's ransom. But by the next book, he's always starting off, he's down to those last few coppers, right, in his pouch. Town is great if you've got a lot of money. Town is brutal if you don't have money, right? In the dungeon, sword, steel, spell may rule the day, but in town, money talks. And so if your character, I'm not being dramatic when I say that, like, when your characters go out there, it's like, come back rich or die trying, it's one of those things where it's just like, it's a tough spot to be in. And you might say, well, this sounds like I could end up in a situation where I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, there is an element of Torchbearer that, I don't want to say it's like Call of Cthulhu-esque, but there is like an element of Torchbearer where it's kind of like part of the fun of the game might just be, your character's slow, demise into, getting grounded in nothingness, right? You kind of have to, like, live with that, right? There's a real chance, there's a real loot of doing this. Like, even getting treasure doesn't work the way that you think it works. You actually have to spend your treasure to get bonuses to die rolls in order to make checks. So in other words, you don't, like, write down, oh, I have 5,000 gold. Like, you might write down, I have a satchel full of gold, and you can erase that satchel full of gold off of your character sheet in order to make get a bonus to making a purchase check to buy something in town. But then that's gone, and it's use it all or use it none. It's a very weird game if you are used to playing D20 and you're like, oh, my character has 3,000. I've been adventuring for a couple levels. My character has 3,000 gold. Sure, not enough to go buy +5 full plate, but I can buy infinite in rooms for the rest of time. What's an in room? 5 silver a night. Yeah, okay. I buy a year book. I book a year's room in advance, right? All of us who have been playing as players, as game masters, we have heard players say that time and time. What's the most expensive room that you have, right? People do that all the time in D20 games because money so quickly becomes a non-issue. That is not the case in Torchbearer. Okay, your characters will never have enough money. They will frequently be broke, and there's no real easy way to get rich. Okay, except for continuously and constantly coming back laden with treasure. Okay, and that maybe eventually enough of it sticks on your character, and you gather some sort of ability. Because again, your characters don't have any ways to make money other than pulling it out from pulling it out from the ancient dungeons and ancient ruins of long forgotten places. So it's a very it's a very fun game. Like as an example here, by the way, you can see here, this is the spaces to value. All right. So like pack means how much space does this thing take? And the value is how many bonus dice does it give you when you go to make a purchase check? So you can see that a bag of copper coins takes up 2 slots in our character's, very limited inventory. All right. Two slots gets taken up by a bag of copper coins, but it's only worth 1 die. Silver coins only take up 1 slot, but they are worth 1 die. Gold take up 1, but are worth 2. Gems take 1, but they're worth 3. Now, jewelry or precious artworks or rugs or tapestries can take a very large amount of space, but you won't know how much they're worth until you get back to town. They could be worth a fantastic amount, or they could be worth almost basically the same as a pouch of silver coins. So you just don't know. And so there's sort of a gamble there. Now, by the way, there are skills that your character could take while you're out in the dungeon or while you're back at camp to determine how much is this, should we bother taking this tapestry? Is it worth anything? But guess what? If you're making that check in the dungeon, that's a turn. And if you fail that check, there's a twist or a condition. And by the way, if you want to make that check at camp where, things are a little bit safer, that's fine. But you have to have earned that check through play. You don't get to just do it, right? You don't get to just make the check. I want to say the haggler skill is what you can use for that. I can't remember exactly which one it is. Anyways, point is, yeah, it's Antique Roadshow at camp, which is fine if that's what you want to use your check on, right? If your character earned a bunch of checks, make the check, use one of them. But then that's a check that you're not using to recover from being exhausted. That's a check that you're not using to maybe help another character heal from being injured or angry or any of those things, right? Everything in this game feels like it's a precious choice. And I like the game, even though the one shot I was supposed to play in fell through. I did get to play a little Mouseguard. Dan says, I adore Mouseguard. I adore Mouseguard as well. And as I said at the beginning of this is sort of like Mouseguard, the next generation. It's a little bit more complicated, but it uses a lot of the same ideas. Obviously in Mouseguard, everyone's a mouse. So everyone has the same nature, right? Which is like, hiding, foraging, I can't remember what the three descriptors of mice are, but right, it's that same basic idea. But the basic concepts are the same. I have endless money and nothing to spend it on your 5e game, which is that's honestly, that's most RPGs. Or you get to these RPGs where it's like, wait, how much is this plus whatever, sword or this really high level magical item? It's 195,000 gold. Wait, let me get this straight. This +3 sword, which yes is a +3 sword, which is a little on a grand scheme of things is not that not that much better than just a +1 sword or even a normal sword, is worth more than like an entire castle. You get to these really strange economies in D&D and Pathfinder that, again, the fact of the matter is we as a community, as a group, we are all used to just sort of ignoring how stupid the economy is. But then people come and play this game and it makes a little bit more sense maybe, but they get frustrated because they liked it when they had infinite money, Oh, I missed it. You have check limits. Yeah, Ryan, you sure do. So I'll basically answer it this way. I'll go to the whiteboard. So, before I go to the whiteboard, Ryan, I'm going to go to this. These are your traits. And in the game, let me actually pull up the list of traits. Is there a traits chapter? Here we go. All right. So here are the traits that the game has. Okay. Adventurous, bitter, bold, extroverted, extravagant, early riser, defender, curious, cunning, calm, brave, born of earth and stone, foolhardy, firstborn, quick-witted, quiet, rough hands, scarred, sharp-eyed. You get the gist of this. All right. So when your character has a trait or two, they have it here on your character sheet, you can use that trait to give yourself a bonus when that trait would apply. But you can also use that trait against yourself over here in this section called earning checks. And when you do that, if you use the check against yourself by giving yourself a penalty to your roll because you say, oh, my trait actually would hurt me here, then you get to fill in one of these little circles that says checks. This is how many checks you have earned. And when your character goes into the camp phase, in order to make a check in the camp phase, you have to spend or erase one of these checks. But here's the real rub of it though. Okay. Which is when we are talking about, when we're talking about this game, okay, in order to, in order for you to sort of do your thing, you're going to probably have to make some checks in order to heal from conditions, in order to learn, new adventures and new ideas, right? You're going to have to use checks. You have to make checks. So there are 3 places that you can make checks. Okay. One is when you are in the adventure, right? When you're in the dungeon. But we already know that making checks in the adventure, right, in the dungeon is risky. Well, or at the very least, it has a cost. Because number one, if you fail a check, right, the consequence could be that something bad happens to you. And that is not where you want it to be happening. But the most important thing here is this takes up an important resource, right? It takes a turn. And we know how important turns are in the dungeon. Your torches will burn out. Your food, you will start to become hungry and tired and angry and irritated and exhausted and dying. And, so when you make a check inside the adventure or the dungeon, it's eating up a turn. Now, when you make it at camp, it's a lot safer. But in order to make the check at camp, you have to use another resource, which are checks, which you earned, right, in the adventure and dungeon phase. So then you think, oh, I will just make my checks back in town. Guess what? It still costs a resource. What's it cost? You guessed it. Money. Which, guess what? you earned from your adventure and dungeon. There is no way in this game that you can basically make checks for free. All right. Skill checks, I should say, right? It's going to cost you something. And a big part of this game is just moving between these phases and interchanging these resources, right? You want to use your turns as expeditiously as possible in order to maximize the number of checks that you are earning, which will allow you to camp and recover from your conditions so that you can continue to adventure, so that you can continue to take turns, so that you can earn money, so that you can go back to town and do stuff. So it's a very cyclical play pattern, okay? And this play pattern here of adventure, dungeon, camp, town, this pretty much informs like almost every game design that Aaron Smith does. He loves this play pattern a lot. And by the way, D&D tried to do this. Okay? Short rest, anybody? Okay? Long rest? Seem familiar? Right? 4th edition D&D did this. 5th edition D&D did this. All right. To a certain extent, Pathfinder 2nd edition does this. So why isn't it compelling? The answer is because it doesn't have this. It's lacking the resources. You can take a short rest whenever, right? You could take a long rest. You can go back to town and rest whenever. So part of the problem is you can move between these phases at will. And so there's no tension when you're talking about short rests and long rests. Now, in some cases, you might say, oh, you could bring tension in. You just put in random encounters. But a lot of people often say, well, then that's going to create more problems because then people are going to become even more. They're already weakened. That's why they're trying to rest. And now they're going to become even more weakened. And this is what we call the death spiral. Okay. And it should go without saying this. Okay. But Torchbearer, because of the fact that if you fail a check, okay, if you fail a check, you are likely going to acquire a condition. And guess what? The conditions make it harder for you to pass your next check, which means you are even more likely to earn a condition, which means you are even more likely to fail your next check, which means Torchbearer is a death spiral. It very, very much is a death spiral. Okay. But that's the game. You know, again, it's trying to emulate that classic old school Moldvay basic D&D experience where, quite frankly, yeah, like if you started running out of spells and torches and water and food and hit points and healing potions, things were going to get rough and tough for you. And it wasn't, you know, you were less likely to be able to succeed. You could get into a situation where you get in over your head in this game and end up dying. So this game is just trying to do that, but with, you know, sort of the burning wheel system. Let's see here. All right. Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. I'm not going to go super late tonight. Okay. Alvaro says there is a post in the Burning Wheel forum calling Torchbearer a misery simulator. Do you agree? Yes. Yes, Alvaro. I will say this, Alvaro. The life of an adventurer in Torchbearer is brutal and short, but there is such a feeling of accomplishment when you do actually make it back to town with money and treasure. I have had characters, you know, literally in my last 5th edition campaign that I played in, that I was a player in, we literally earned the Hammer of Thunderbolt, the Mjolnir, the Hammer of Thor as an artifact, and we like sold it at some interplanar marketplace because no one wanted it. And so we just wanted the money. So I've had characters earn literally intergalactic fortunes. I've had characters become, kings and queens, but there is something truly special about actually kind of winning Torchbearer because it's kind of a misery simulator. I actually agree with that. And again, that's either a good thing or like, again, I get it. It's not even something that I want to play all the time. In fact, as I was saying before, this has a very outsized influence on me and Aaron because the number of times that like this has gotten to the table at our game, very, very small. We've certainly never played the 10 to 20 sessions that Thor was talking about at the beginning of, in order to really experience a full session of the game, you need to put in 10 or 20 sessions. We've not done that. And so there's definitely a part of me that's like, I want heroic action. I want the superheroes. I want the Avengers, right? This is not that by any stretch of the imagination. I bought, this kind of feels like a step backwards from Mouseguard to me. I think it's a step forward in the sense of the extra levels of complexity from Mouseguard. I don't know about like, in terms of its intention. I mean, you could argue Mouseguard is more noble in its intention. I bought Mouseguard because I was in my mouse era. Wanderhome, Mouse Ritter, and Mouseguard all bought within a week. I know it's a tangent, but that appraise skill gets me pumped for the non-combat survival skill talent use in Forbidden Lands. I'm looking forward to that stuff more than combat, and rightfully so. I mean, Ryan, one of the classes in Forbidden Lands, right, is like the peddler, right, or like the merchant. And it actually feels like that could actually be something useful because the game isn't about combat. It's got combat in it, don't get me wrong, but the game is mostly about wilderness exploration and survival. And so there are other things that should and will and do come to the forefront. So I'm right there with you, buddy. I think it's important to acknowledge that Burning Wheel games are not broadly applicable games. 100%. They're very deliberately creating rules that you'll bounce again if you aren't experiencing it as intended. Yes. These are not generic D20, apply it to everything. Torchbearer is designed to run Torchbearer. Mouseguard is designed to run Mouseguard, but it is date night, and you know what? I respect it. We've got a long week ahead. Besides, we're getting into the holidays here. Most of us, there's obviously people out there that are, working, not so cushy jobs as I do, but my company really slows down in December and a lot of people have time off. So a lot of time to catch up on VODs and stuff like that. But yes, I like it from a design point, but it's not, I'm not sure how much I'd like it in play. It's worth playing, but the thing about it is, like they said, you can't just play it one and done. And the problem I think a lot of people have with Torchbearer, I think this is true for a lot of games, by the way, is they go, oh, we'll do the one shot. I've run this for people at Gen Con. I've run Dread Crypt of Skogenby a number of times. And it's fine, but I don't think you can truly appreciate the game without playing it, maybe half a dozen times to really get the sense for the cycles of play. I think that's what really makes the game kind of, hum. Did I receive a preview copy of Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered? Quins, I did not receive a preview copy of Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered. I got mine the Monday or whatever that they started shipping PDFs, and they would send you the link when your order got shipped. So I got mine the same day as pretty much everybody else. Pepper says, I just caught up on the VOD. I was skeptical because everything I've heard about Burning Wheel scared me. And rightfully so, Pepper. It is a scary game. But this actually seems really fun. I mean, it is a unique experience. I think that there is, and I think a lot of people who really like Crane's games, and one day we will tackle this. Okay. This is by far the strangest RPG that you will never play. In fact, I would argue to say, I mean, I think they like made 1,000 copies of this game, and I don't think like I don't know, they might all be destroyed. Anyways, this game is the weirdest game that anyone will ever play. But point is, Luke Crane makes a lot of games that I think are really, really, really interesting. I just don't know, you know, what we're supposed to do with it. And in a way, I mean, this is kind of a good analogy, right? I own a nice watch, okay? A nice Omega. It is a Seamaster Professional. Thing is, it is a mechanical watch. It works by winding, and it has a rotor inside of it that, you know, keeps it perpetually wound. Very complex piece of equipment, right? Very awesome. It's a beautiful watch. But I don't wear it much. And I'll tell you why I don't wear it. Number one, because, you know, it's worth a lot and I want something a little bit more rugged and everyday. Number two, right? So I wear my Garmin Forerunner, right? My running watch, because it tracks my heart rate and it tracks my steps, and I can, you know, I get my messages from my phone sent here, and whatnot. Now, on balance, the Omega is a much better watch. It's more intricately, beautifully designed, but in all practical purposes, you know, from a usefulness standpoint, this is a much more useful watch. But that other watch is so beautiful. That other watch is so pristine. That other watch is so nice, right? I'd like to collect more watches at some point in the future. But like Luke Crane games, I think a lot of people collect them just because you want to be able to look at them and see how beautiful they are. You know, it's one of those things where I think a lot of people really respect Luke Crane. I think they really respect his designs. I don't know how many people, you know, we saw in the poll today, how many people are actually getting to these games and playing these games. I think the number is fairly small. And I'll be the first to admit, Burning Wheel scares me as well. I've never fully read through the entire book. It is a daunting game. And I'm almost kind of like, I don't know what am I even supposed to be doing with this, you know? So it can be a very, very, intimidating set of circumstances. Damn, LMAO, time to reflect. Reflect on what? I mean, we didn't even ask for it. So I mean, for all I know, maybe they would have sent us one. I don't know. We didn't ask for one. I don't know. I don't know what you mean. What time to reflect on what? You're over here with the cleaver hacking away. Yeah, probably not. Maybe not the best idea when, you know, you're talking about one of these games, because again, they are so intricate and so intertwined. But I don't think there's anything wrong with hacking your own personal game. I mean, I think the key here is understanding the distinction between saying this is a adjustment. Don't use the word fix. This is an adjustment for my group. Versus saying like, oh, I fixed this and I made this, but it's like, well, that's implying that you're making a generic solution. And most of the time, you're not, right? You're actually just trying to fix a specific problem that your specific group has. And you know, your solution may not work for everybody else. So it's kind of a broad statement to say that you're fixing it. Yes. If they did send me one, I probably would have. Well, I mean, look, if they had sent me a remaster preview, I wouldn't have even known what to do with it, because, you know, I wasn't going to make 27 videos like Ronald did, where I talk about every single thing that they did differently. I would probably want to do a live stream and go through it, but that is precisely what they do not want me to do. So, like, even if they had sent me one, I probably wouldn't have done much with it, to be honest with you. Torchbearer seems less scary because it's dangerous, but from how you described it, it doesn't seem arbitrary. The GM is encouraged to signal when the players are getting over their heads. That is actually very accurate. You know, it's funny. It reminds me of something that Donnie said. We did a stream. Donnie's one of our patrons. We did a stream about Mithras, which is sort of a RuneQuest right? Old school game. And he said, Mithras has these really, really punishing injury tables. And he said, but in a weird way, it feels less dangerous because in D&D, characters will just stick around until everybody's just dead. But in this game, it's like if you get struck and you're suddenly bleeding out, but you're not like unconscious or at zero, you're just like, oh, my arm is a mangled, mess. You're much more likely to go like, okay, it's time to leave. It's time to flee. It's time to get out of here. And I think that that's like a really interesting point of perspective. I mean, I will say this, Pepper, it is a risk reward, press your luck type situation, right? You want to keep going into the dungeon. You want to keep getting treasure. You can't want to keep, getting and finding cool things, but the clock is ever ticking. And every time you go deeper, every time you go, longer, you're risking more problems for your characters. And so you have to balance everything. And sometimes it comes down to taking a gamble, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. And I mean, to me, that is at the heart of what a quote unquote dungeon crawling experience is. It's all about just pressing your luck. That's not something that really exists inside of most structured APs, right? Like most structured APs are designed to have, balanced fights that are made for your character, and they follow this very set of progressions. And then, when the monsters get tougher, it's because the adventure gave you enough experience points to level up, or there's even like at this milestone, after the party reaches this town, everybody should level to 3, right? And then everything gets tougher, but you got tougher. So everything is based around you. So like, what does it mean to press your luck in that instance? There's no option really for characters to go like, oh, we want to kill the bad guy tonight, and we're going to keep going. And it's like, okay, but it doesn't really matter if you do or you don't. It's not going to change, anything. We're this Friday. Yeah. This Friday, we're going to be starting level 10 of Abomination Vaults. So we are almost done with it. I have soured somewhat on that module. But I still think it's okay. I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I do agree. The sense of urgency in Abomination Vaults is massively missing. And furthermore, the entire plan of Belcora is absolutely ridiculous. She is a level 12 ghost who wants to, with a bunch of lower level, level 5 and 6 and 7 aberrations, who wants to take out Absalom, the place where the Whispering Tyrant led a Lord of the Rings style siege against it and failed. It's like, I don't know. Let Belcora do her thing. What is she going to go do? Die at Absalom? Yeah, that's what she's going to go do. It doesn't matter. Anyways, get off pop. All right, everybody. Thanks everybody for hanging out with me tonight. We are going to be back this week. I don't know what we're going to be doing, but we're going to be talking to the patrons to find out what they want to hear from. We've got some streams coming up with the boys, with Bob and Aaron. We're still trying to figure out what our December schedule is going to be like. Because let's see, 26th is the day after. Yeah, it should be fine. So hopefully there's not too many disruptions. But again, we're really looking forward to getting a new actual play started, probably in the new year, and that'll start taking up a bunch of these streams. But as always, let us know. Become a member of the Patreon. Be part of the group that votes for what these streams are about. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let me encourage you to subscribe. Maybe click the like button and the notification bell so that whenever we go stream, especially these bonus Sunday streams, you might miss it. I think this is the 4th time I streamed this week. I think I streamed Tuesday, Thursday. Yes, I streamed. No, I did not stream Thursday because it was Thanksgiving and I had off. But I did stream Wednesday on Roll for Combat. So I streamed Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and today. So that's us. We're putting out 5 to 10 hours of content a week, every week. So I know it's a lot to keep up with. Watch the videos you're interested in, maybe skip on some of the ones you're not, but either way, if you want to show some love and support, always consider checking out our Patreon. Link in the description below. Yes, that's true. This could have been a 4th edition stream. That was the almost second place was talk about 4th edition. And actually, I wasn't even going to talk about 4th edition. I was just going to like build low level 4E encounters with everybody and, you know, find cool monsters and show you how awesome and fun and quick it is to build awesome 4E encounters. It's one of my favorite things to do. Even after we stopped playing 4th edition, I would still make 4E encounters just for the fun of it because I liked doing it so much. And that was like, of course, I was like, practiced at that point. So like I was much quicker and I knew the monsters much better than I do now. It's been many, many years. So, all right, everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. And we'll see you next week and next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace out.